So as you know, pornography is pervasive. It's just everywhere. I have a friend who works with an organization that puts college students into mentoring relationships with high school programs, with high school students. My friend's about my age. He's in his mid to late 30s. And he had a conversation with some of his college student mentors, asking what he, as a mid-30-something, didn't understand about high school culture. And the answer was, you just don't get pornography at all. You think pornography is something which is hard to access, that you have to work to attain. You have to visit the store, sort of shamefacedly walk up to the clerk and ask for something behind the counter. And that's just not the way it is. It's everywhere. It's on the back of the bus for middle school kids with their phones. It's just simply everywhere. And the statistics about this are really overwhelming. You've read some of these things, the number of pornography websites there are, the number of searches that there are done every day, every year for pornography. It's really overwhelming and a difficult thing to even comprehend. Every other year I teach a course on sexual morality. And most of the course is about abstract arguments about marriage and sexual activity and this and that sexual act. We just have a sort of normal conversation, very philosophical. When we get to the section on pornography, though, the line begins to form outside of my office door. And by the end of the semester, I almost always am in control of, locked in my filing cabinet, about 3 to 5 laptops. And students come and check their laptops out for me, and I sort of unlock them and hand them to them, and they go and do their work and then come back. But of course, about a week after they've handed me their laptop, they show up at my office again, and now I have a filing cabinet full of phones. It's just simply everywhere. And about a week after that, I tend to have young engaged couples sitting in my office as they discuss pornography use and what they're going to do to overcome or to deal with the porn addiction that's already operative in their relationship as they move forward into marriage. It's just simply everywhere, and it's almost overwhelming. In fact, if you read the news, was it 2 weeks ago? Pornography is so accessible and overwhelming now that even Playboy has decided to no longer have nudes in the magazine because it's so passé, it's so easily accessible that no one would ever actually buy Playboy for the nudes. Apparently now you will buy Playboy actually for the articles. That old excuse may in fact now turn out to be true. It's just everywhere. Even Hef can't sell porn anymore because it's available to everyone. Think about college campus culture. Think about the parties. You probably have these on your college campuses. Think about the frat parties, which is the CEO and secretary party, right? This is the porn fantasy being lived out. Or it's Halloween tonight. Think about the pornography parties and costumes which will occur all over college campuses this evening. Porn is so prevalent that even people who don't use pornography frequently, if at all, have their sexual tastes impacted and affected by pornography. That which is expected in consensual sexual activities, even for those who don't use pornography, is informed by porn use. We're a pornified culture, and it dominates and governs us all. Today we have a panel. I'm very excited about our speakers. We have Dr. William Struthers from Wheaton College, who does work on the neural effects of pornography. We know that neural pathways that form in pornography use changes the way that people are wired for intimacy. He's done a good deal of work on that. And then we're also privileged to have Ms. Dawn Hawkins with us, who's the Executive Director for the National Center on Sexual Exploitation, to tell us about some of the activities and actions that she and her organization have done to combat porn usage. When you hear about the statistics, it'd be easy to throw up your hands and give up. There's no reason to give up. There's lots we can do. We're going to have about 20 minutes per speaker, and then we'll have ample time for questions and answers. Would you join me in welcoming Dr. Struthers?
I think we're going to need a screen, so if we can put that down. They told me to submit a PowerPoint, and I'd rather not just turn the laptop around. Well, there's a, oops, you've got it. Thank you. There's an image that I'd like to show you. It's an image that I would, oops, good. All right. It's one that's been approved by the conference presenters, but to my mind, it's actually one that does a great job of illustrating. Maybe they haven't approved it. Okay, so we'll just go with the ones on the sides then? Is that the idea? Okay, all right. Well, then you're going to have to look off to the side. Realize that was going to happen. So buckle up, this is going to be fast because I've only got 20 minutes and I've got about 10 years of research that I'd like to give you. The title of the talk is, or the presentation is on harms in hope, porn, address, and the brain. And this image is a pornographic image, and it's one that you're probably very familiar with, but I think does a great job of demonstrating what's going on in the brain with respect to pornography. Now, you guys remember this back in January, right? Right, the dress that broke the internet, an image that when viewed by different people, some saw it as blue and black, others as yellow and gold. This is actually a set of images. You can notice there to the right, to the far side, there's like a little band, I think it's a red bar, and then the distance over the right, sort of the right elbow there's a little bit of red background. You can alter this image just a little bit by increasing the white balance, and that will change the way that you perceive the color of this dress. And in my house, I always see the dress as white and gold. My wife always sees it as blue and black when we see the same dress. And what I think is interesting about this is because, when the dress broke the internet, all the brain scientists and all the psychologists and sensational perception researchers, whoa, this is our chance to be famous. And so they jumped in, and we'd known about this for a long time. These are common principles that we'd known about, but people were just experiencing through, this was an image that a woman took a picture of a dress, she sent it to someone else as a text, and she said, why is this white and gold? I thought we were doing blue and black, and then it blew up. But as a researcher, we know that color constancy is something that people will see always the blue and the black, even though everything else is the same. But if we were to change the light, you would move from seeing it as blue and black to white and gold, which is kind of what we've done here. Also, there are perceptual boundaries, right? You can't see the head of the individual or the legs of the person who's wearing this. We sort of cropped it so that you can only see the dress and maybe a little bit of stuff around it. The white balance, the manner in which we're sort of bringing the light source up or bringing it down will change it. Also, it's a pixelated image. It's one that's been pushed through a medium and then displayed on a big overhead or a small phone. So we've digitized it. And also context is important. Because the thing that I find most interesting about this is that even though my wife and I are looking at the same image under the same exact environment, the conditions are all the same, we still see the colors differently. And what I would like to argue is that your generation has actually grown up in an environment that causes you to see sex as always white and gold, where the generation before you has always seen it as blue and black. Because your generation is part of the great societal experiment known as internet porn. And so you have grown up with pornography available anything you want, anytime you want it, anywhere you want it, with anyone that you want to do it with. And so this has shaped the way that your generations now see sex as always white and gold. And you're having conversations with the older generation that always sees it as blue and black, and they don't get why you don't see it as blue and black. And they don't get why, why you're unable to see the white and gold. Because much of what we see now with the pornification of the culture is that, I think Dr. Schnell hit on it, pornography is inherently a way of thinking about sexuality that cannibalizes itself. And so the internet porn movement now, where people could just buy their own phones and make their own foreplay of sexting to one another, why do you need Playboy anymore? I think you'll see this beginning to get more and more severe as we go on. Also thinking about the notion of Viagra is necessary for 60-year-old men to get erections on demand whenever they want, I think speaks about a way of thinking about sexuality that is very late adolescent. And so even the older men are, I'm a 45-year-old man. I don't want to have the libido of an 18-year-old. I don't want that. My wife doesn't want that anymore. My kids don't want that, especially. Thinking about the way that we've taken this kind of season of sexuality and set it up as the standard that 80-year-olds should be able to have these kinds of experiences whenever they want, I think is a way of thinking about sex that we need to stop and maybe think about. Many of you are familiar with what are sometimes referred to as the 3 A's, those of anonymity, accessibility, and affordability. You can get porn in a private fashion so no one knows who you are. but they really do. They've got your computer, I know, ISP number or whatever that is. The accessibility of it, the affordability of it, the majority of it is free. The bulk of the revenue that's made is more off of ads that are put up on the websites, or for subscription services, which actually are a very small portion of the pornography available. There are the Dodges, that's a Dodge car there, that's why I need to remember that. The Dodges of, how do you define it? I know it when I see it. Well, that's a hard thing to enforce. So that ties into the legislation of rules against pornography. How do you legislate against this, especially when there are First Amendment issues at stake? And then finally, we heard a little bit about it just this morning. Well, how can you show that pornography causes something? Most of them, I mean, unless you're going to get a whole bunch of genetic clones and raise them in two different environments, one with free access to porn, the other with no access to porn, you really can't make any kind of causal links, which to me smacks of an argument that I think tobacco users used with the connection with tobacco and lung cancer. So we've got these problems that we have when we do research. But we do see, especially in my laboratory, there's a lot of conversation about what constitutes nudity versus nakedness. What does it mean to be in a state of undress versus naked? When I'm teaching a class and we have a picture of a naked male or a naked female in the book, that's not porn. But some people think that it's porn. That says more about who they are and the way they look at the images than about the images themselves. There are wonderful nudes that are beautiful pieces of art that hang in the loop. Well, is that pornography? Should we think of it that way? When I took my son to the Art Institute in Chicago, there were all these sculptures of little naked babies and their butts and their little body parts were sticking out. And he just giggled hysterically because he just thought that was so funny. Because to an infant, the naked breast means food. To the 5-year-old, it means mom doesn't have any clothes on. To the 10-year-old, it means, ooh, this makes me feel weird. To the 20-year-old, it makes them aroused. To the 40-year-old, it's a reminder of the fact that this is the woman who nursed my child. So when we think about the nature of the breast and about developmentally the way that we think about it, we've got to have a different way of talking about it than the 18, 19, 20-year-old of naked bodies or for grinding together and having orgasms. It's a different way of thinking about it. So I prefer to talk about sexually explicit imagery. And sexually explicit imagery can be the depiction of the genitals, but it can also be the picture of a woman making a solicitous facial advance, right? Victoria's Secret doesn't just show women standing there. They're sort of strutting around, kind of pouting, aren't they? So you stop and think about, even though you're not seeing the nipple, you're not seeing the genitals, there's something that's giving that sort of come hither. I want to lie with you. And so what we're doing actually in our lab is looking at, is there something about not necessarily the objectification that pornography pushes? I mean, I still know that's a woman. I still know that's a man. But perhaps what pornography does is when there's a solicitous signal being sent, that what it does is it activates some parts of the brain that increase arousal and decreases other parts of the brain, inhibits them, that you actually lose your ability to see that person in a specific way. And there's a great study done by Gray et al. In 2011 that shows that when you look at images of women who are sexualized, not naked, but sexualized, you actually will code them as being stripped of their moral agency. You animalify them. You dehumanize them. You don't objectify them like they're objects on stage. You still see them as human, but they're humans that have sort of devolved into this primal mating frenzy. And so thinking about the way that ties into the scripts that we see in porn and the erotica that's written about those 50 Shades of Grey, the mommy porn of romance novels, taps into, I would say, a female disposition towards the narrative as opposed to the male disposition, which is that of the image. But these are designed to orbit around each other. That men, after looking at images, kind of want a little bit of story. That women, after reading about the story, would kind of like a little bit of the tactile sensate part as well. And so we think about sexual exploitation that is done through these romance novels, through the pornography. I'd like to argue that pornography is really a subset of sexual exploitation. It oftentimes appeals to the language of empowerment, and many people who feel disempowered will cling on that. I think there was a great example of Belle Knox, who was a Duke University student, who talked about the empowering impact that being in a porn movie had for her. But when you actually look at the content of the movie, there's nothing empowering about it. The transient financial empowerment actually is disproportional to the long-term emotional and social consequences. Well, we can have a lot of conversation about this, and I'm sure other people have already talked about it or will get to it. There is the disproportionate exploitation. Women are disproportionately exploited in the production of pornography, although men are exploited as well. They're just props. Men are props in porn, by the way, in case you didn't know that. Name 10 porn stars that are male. You can't. Most men can't. Women can maybe name 3. So even think about men are just animalified. They don't even need names. And by the way, women don't need names on the side of the football field. Think about cheerleaders. Do they have names or numbers on their uniforms? There's not enough fabric to put those on there, by the way. Men are just struck a nerve. Sorry about that. Men, however, are disproportionately affected and exploited in the consumption. So much porn is developed for men, by men, using women. But you'll hear, okay, there's porn produced for women, by women, but yeah, men are watching that stuff too. There's some interesting research looking at the mental health issues surrounding what happens when a woman is in the pornography industry. The study here, looking at young California women as sort of the baseline. Lots of things we see: broken home, neglect, abandonment, sexual abuse. Common outcomes, they're all bad. They're not very good, by the way. Looking at men, a great article once again by David Rothbard in 2011. Men who are viewing pornography, these are men who are just kind of being told to look at porn on their laptops, photographing their faces. These are men who've kind of been stripped of their humanity when they're in the midst of this. They've kind of lost their ability to be clear thinkers. And there's broad agreement, generally speaking, that viewing sexually explicit images and material changes the way you think about sexuality. It does cause there to be an increase in some risky sexual behaviors and drug use, especially during sex. That's another conversation we need to have, how drug use always compromises consent. That will happen tonight on this campus, I'm sure, that you'll have 2 people who are alcohol-induced in compromised positions and will do things that they will look back and say, well, I really wish I hadn't done that. So we think about the ability to consent. We think also there's some research that suggests that some of these can actually be counteracted by coming in after the fact and educating about the negative consequences of this. There's some inconsistent findings in my reading. Some may disagree with me on this. With respect to the number of partners and sexual aggression, I think it is true that most violent sexual offenders have pornography as part of their profile, but I do also know that there's a lot of people who are viewing porn and are foregoing sexual partners because they're using pornography as their partner. So you're seeing a decrease in the number of partners. It does change the attitudes and beliefs about the recreational commodity. As exposure increases, a lot of bad things happen, about porn actually being sort of a user's guide, an instrumental view of sex, a preoccupation and distractedness, a greater permissive activity, sexual behaviors you're embracing. This pornographic script is tied to a lot of other negative things: negative sexual self-confidence, social isolation, increased depression, decreased bonding with your caregivers. If guys are concerned, just tell them, hey, guys, by the way, it makes you think that your penis is super small. That gets their attention. Because the majority of male performers are not the average man. And so this causes many men to question their own genitals. And so genital insecurity is not just among women, but also among men. We hear the language that porn is an addiction, that porn is like crack for the eyes, which to me gets the order wrong. In many ways, heroin is like distilled orgasm. Crack is like concentrated foreplay, because we're made for foreplay. We're made for orgasm. We're not made for these drugs. But we're so used to using the drug language, and the pornography language sort of is tied more as is it an addiction? Is it a compulsion? APA and the DSM are trying to sort all that stuff out. But maybe a better way to think about it is porn is stuff that you would never see in the real world unless you were living in an orgy 24 hours a day. It's a super normal stimulus, one that goes beyond what you would normally expect to see. Any of you can pull up on your phones right now and see easily 10,000 naked people. I can't see 10,000 naked people in this room. Just can't happen. I mean, there's fire code issues, right? We can't get everything in. There's also, I've got bad eyes, right? And some of you are across the room, so I can't see with the same clarity, so I need to move over to you. And so thinking about just the practical limitations of being able to see this, and you're seeing lots of organizations fighting against this. Don will talk about this here in a bit. But I'm more interested in looking at it from a neurological perspective. Sexual images are a great way to test fMRI machines. You might not know about that. They're brilliant because the brain always lights up when you look at sexually explicit material. It lights up in a way that specifically activates those regions that drugs act on because they're the natural hedonic system. We also know that viewing porn not only just arouses you, but causes you to map yourself onto the people that you're watching. As I'm standing up here moving my arm in this way, the regions of your brain that coordinate the movement of your arm in this way are currently being activated, but no one's doing this. Could some people just kind of do what I just did? Yeah, it's easy to do because we map ourselves onto other people. And when you view pornography, neurologically, you are vicariously engaging in the behaviors that you're seeing. Now, you might know what you're in for because you maybe visited the site over and over again, but you might stumble into something that you were not anticipating. A violent act in the middle of a scene that you thought was caring now has suddenly turned rough. You have now neurologically, vicariously participated in that act. And that's a dangerous thing to think about. It's called the mirror neuron system. And this is a great study back in 2008. And I know there's some people are wrestling out, what is the system? Can we get into there? How do we measure it? That's kind of what we're wrestling with in our lab. How do we monitor this? But this is not just, some crackpot little prof out at a small evangelical school west of Chicago. This is Cambridge University is doing research in this area as well. Valerie Voon in her lab, looking at just a cattle call to the general environment. Hey, we need people for brain imaging study, come in. Brings people in and finds, when she measures any number of different variables, the amount of pornography use that they engage in, actually is correlated with decreased functioning in some areas and decreased size of some brain regions. Is it a chicken or the egg problem? Definitely. Correlation doesn't equal causation. That's great. So are you just going to sit back and not do anything about it? Or can we start with the chickens and perhaps change the eggs? Or should we start with the eggs and perhaps hope that we can make different types of chickens as they grow up? I would rather say, let's do something about it rather than sit back and say, oh, it's difficult to do. That just falls into that tobacco analogy of causal inference. What we're doing is we're trying to look at the different types of pornography and the different neurological systems that are invested. I'm very interested in impulsive porn viewers, the guys who have a thought, hey, Kim Kardashian, hey, let's see if we can find some naked pictures of her. That's an impulsive user, as opposed to someone who sees, wow, there's an attractive person on the other side of the room. I can't stop thinking about them. I can't stop thinking about them. And they go through their day thinking about it, and then later on they go view some porn to relieve that stress. So thinking about different ways that we use pornography to self-medicate, to get us out of our stress or anxiety. Maybe we are horny, to use that phrase. Some people are just sort of sexually aroused, and they use pornography as a masturbatory aid to relieve that anxiety, to relieve that tension. Or they're impulsive. Sometimes people will view porn because they're angry or frustrated. But when you use something, you also have the potential to misuse it, or to abuse it, or develop an addiction, and then we hear language of dependence and tolerance. For some people, that does seem to be a pattern, but not for everyone. I think in today's sort of language of orientation, many people that I come into contact with are not gay, they're not straight, they're not bisexual, they're pornosexual. They can't really be with a real human being. They need their porn to get them aroused. And the thought of pornography gets them much more aroused than the thought of being with a real person. I myself am not heterosexual or bisexual or straight or any of that. I like to refer to myself as Donna-sexual. Donna is my wife. And that's my little way of sort of, personally sticking it to the man, right? It's like, no, I appreciate those categories, and those categories can be helpful for some people, but those categories don't fit my experience because I am neurologically now trained to be attracted to my wife. Because I have been faithful to her, I don't entertain these other thoughts, I don't regularly pursue these other types of sexual stimulations. And so what I find the only people I have to worry about are women who look like my wife. But when she turns around, I know that face. I know that face. And so I like to call myself Donna-sexual. And maybe that works for you, maybe it doesn't. But bringing it back, I need to wrap up here because I'm running short on time. Think about the way that pornography is a constant, the way that it subjectively kind of forces itself on you thinking that sex is about this one act in this one moment, and it's all about this. It's all about this script. They kiss, they perform oral sex on each other, they have multiple positions, somebody orgasms, usually the male, and then it's over. How does that's a bad script. It's a bad script. But it's the only script that people are given. The boundaries, there's nothing leading up, the day that led up, the things that happen afterwards, the child that could potentially be conceived. They're not included in pornography. There's always an alteration. It's manipulated, it's pixelated. And the context, the narrative, really changes the way that we think about pornography. And I like to argue that some people just can't help but see the white and the gold dress. What we're trying to do in our lab, and if you're interested I can tell you more about it, is are there ways that we can train people to think differently that actually will alter them neurologically and alter their psychological experience? Thank you very much.
Good morning. So I'm Hawkins. I'm with the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. We're based in Washington, D.C. And our goal is to try to expose the seamless connections between all forms of sexual exploitation, but we primarily focus on pornography and pornography's role in this huge problem of sexual exploitation. People often think that things like sex trafficking or sexual violence, rape, broken marriages, prostitution, child sexual abuse, that these are happening in a vacuum. Our president and Congress have set up committees to study the problem of sexual violence on our college campuses and in the military, but they're completely ignoring the role that pornography is playing in this. And so that's what we're trying to do, is help people see that really there are reams of research today that show that these things are all connected and that pornography has a very adverse effect not only on the individual and family, but also on our society. Today, I could talk about so many different things, and I actually just flew in from Salt Lake City where I was attending the World Congress on Families. It was an incredible event. There were about 3,200 people from all around the world just coming together to fight for the family. And I feel like that's what you guys are doing. That's what this event is too. And when I walked in the room this morning, I was just even more overcome seeing all of your faces, the younger crowd who's committed to also defending the family. And so thank you for being here. And I want to focus on the impact that pornography can have, particularly on the family, on marriages, and in the dating world. I'm assuming that most of you are dating right now. Hopefully you're asking each other out. So let's talk about how pornography is affecting that. There's quite a lot of research on this. Right now I'm sourcing Jill Manning, who has developed a meta-analysis really of a lot of research. But she did this in 2008, and there's a lot more research out now, but they find the same things that she found in her meta-analysis. But we know that those who are viewing pornography regularly, whether it's a man or a woman viewing it, they tend to have decreased sensitivity toward women. They have less respect for women's equality, women's rights. And again, it doesn't matter if it's a man or a woman watching it. Women feel the same way when they're viewing pornography. We know that they're at increased risk of becoming aggressive and abusive. It's so alarming to know that those who are regularly viewing pornography are 3 times more likely to have an extramarital affair and 4 times more likely to visit a prostituted woman. You can clearly see the link here between pornography and prostitution, and also between pornography and sex trafficking. Often women, wives, spouses, they don't want to perform the acts that are found in pornography. It's incredibly degrading usually and very violent, and so often men will seek it elsewhere. I'm not saying by any means that everybody who views pornography will seek out a woman and pay for sex, but many do. We know that that viewers of pornography are at increased risk of sexual dysfunction and dissatisfaction. In 2011, there were 3 studies that came out within a month of each other, one in Italy, one in Norway, and one here in the U.S., showing that increasingly young men in their 20s and 30s are struggling with porn-induced erectile dysfunction. I mean, the fact that 20-year-olds are struggling with being sexually active, this has terrible consequences for building families and for having long-lasting and emotionally attached relationships. We see a decreased desire to marry and have children. Another study just came out in December this last year, indicating that many men are finding using pornography as a substitute for real relationships. They even admitted that in the study. And so increasingly young men don't even want to get married and have a relationship or a family. And I think it's very important too that pornography has an impact on our spiritual lives, and that therefore impacts our ability to have close connections with others like our wives or our husbands. I kind of went through some of this, but characteristics of stable and healthy marriages, I'm sure that you would all agree that the things on the left is what you really want in a spouse, in a relationship. You want fidelity, you want respect, you want trust, you want safety, you want a spiritual foundation, you want to know that they're connected to you. Pornography is pretty much the complete opposite of all of that. Specifically how pornography harms kids, and I just want to focus on this because most of us in the millennial age, we grew up with pornography. So I hope that this helps you understand maybe how you might have been affected by pornography particularly. But we know that early exposure affects the psychological, physical, and social development. It very much will alter and change the sexual templates that we're forming. We instead of having developing our sexual taste together with another human being, we have our sexual taste rooted in porn sex. And what does that mean? It means that all women want rough and violent sex all the time. It means that women, when they say no, they really mean yes, right? That's the sexual template that we're building when we're exposing ourselves or children or growing up with a regular diet of pornography. I'll skip a couple of those. We are seeing increasingly that some of the consequences of children being exposed to pornography include increased child-on-child sexual abuse. I have a Google alert on a variety of things that I get every morning relating to pornography, and sadly, every single day I know that I'm going to have 10 plus articles showing up from my Google alert because children are acting out what they're viewing in pornography with one another. And it's not necessarily because, they want to hurt one another. It's because they're curious. It's because they want to be like adults. They want to be cool. When kids are seeing what adults are doing, this is what they think they're supposed to do. I remember the first time that I saw pornography. I was 9 years old. Probably many of you were around the same age the first time that you saw it. And thankfully, I'm so grateful that I went to my dad and I showed him what I saw. And thankfully my dad addressed it right then. But I remember those feelings of insecurity that I felt and how I was suddenly feeling different among all the boys in my class because I saw what I thought I was going to be expected to do. But my dad gratefully helped set the record straight and helped me feel like I could be anything I wanted. I'm a strong woman. I could be independent. But how many parents are really sitting down with their kids and talking about these things and helping our kids to understand, make sense of the world that they're living in? So you as young adults, young parents, I see babies out there, and you will have babies soon, better than anyone else probably, that you have to talk to your kids about these things. You have to help them develop their sexual templates and not let the pornography do it for them. A few other harms of pornography, or consequences of pornography that I want to focus on is that it increases the demand for prostituted and trafficked women and children. The brain science kind of indicates that, it does indicate, and what I mean is Dr. Struthers kind of hit on this, but we become bored with the same images. We seek harder, we seek more novelty, and that's why you can see that Playboy is irrelevant today. It's not even exciting for many people today because so many have become bored with that type of material. And as people seek out harder and more deviant types of material, Sometimes they deviate to certain fetishes, sometimes they deviate to child pornography. Child pornography right now is overwhelming our court systems and our jails. And I'll talk about the laws in a second about the adult pornography laws, but when we go to the U.S. Department of Justice and we say, why aren't you doing anything about the adult pornography laws, they say, because we're overwhelmed with the child pornography cases. We don't know what to do. Our argument is we have to do something about what's causing the demand for this child pornography. We have to do something about what's creating these tastes for sex with children. And our argument is that it's adult pornography, largely. But also some will be more enticed to acting out. And last week I organized a protest at Amnesty International's headquarters in Washington, D.C. On a side note, Amnesty International has just adopted a policy to decriminalize prostitution. We see this as a huge problem for women and women's rights everywhere. So we got together and had a large protest outside of their office in D.C. And 5 women were walking by and kind of stopped, all separately. So I stepped out of the line and went to talk to them, and the 5 women all told me about how they were prostituted, or the legal term would be sex trafficked, because they were under the age of 16 when they started. And they all told me that pornography was created of them while they were being prostituted. And 3 of them told me that they know for sure that some of those images have been uploaded to the internet on very popular porn websites. There's nothing that they could do about it. I mean, the fact that pornography, prostitution, and sex trafficking are linked, we have to stop ignoring that in and of itself. There is hope. The brain is plastic. We create these pathways cemented in our use of pornography, but it can be undone too. I always like to show people this picture. It's my friend's great-grandparents. This is on their 83rd anniversary, right? This is what God intends for us to be able to have long-lasting, deep connections with another human being, to be able to grow and progress together. Pornography disrupts the ability to have these this long-lasting bond. And so I strive for this. I'm only married almost 5 years, so maybe we can make it. I don't know. Maybe 3 years. Our tactics. So what can we do about this, right? What can we do? Well, our organization is focused on advocacy mostly. We try to change policies that we see as facilitating sexual exploitation. Just last week we got Hyatt hotels to get rid of pornography in hotels worldwide. And a month ago we got Hilton hotels. In my opinion, when we change policies, whether they're corporate policies or laws that are facilitating pornography, we're also sending a message to the public that this is something that they should be concerned about and that we should band together. We would argue that there's a public health crisis from pornography. The research is there. It needs to be all gathered. We need more leaders to step up and help us make this claim. And so all of you who are young and in college and just starting off on your career paths, maybe keep that in mind, that we need more leaders to step up in the movement to end exploitation. You really have to protect yourself. That's first and foremost. It's annoying to get filters on. Sometimes they overblock things. They're frustrating to set up, but they're really important. I encourage you to get an accountability partner. Someone who you can trust and you can go to and tell them when you're feeling weak, because we all do at different points. This is a hard battle, especially because the stuff is coming at us from every angle. It's in our pockets now. It's at the checkout line when we're at the grocery store. We should be able to bring it out of the dark and help each other, rely on one another. So I encourage you to do that. And in your families, as you're starting new families, think about starting healthy traditions. Make it a place where your kids feel like they can come to you on any issue, but especially on issues relating to sex, You want them to come to you and ask these questions, not go look it up in Google. You need to have frequent discussions with your children, with your spouse, with your boyfriends, with your girlfriends. And I think this is an interesting point. It's awkward to ask your boyfriend or your girlfriend about their porn usage. I remember when I asked my husband, and I was so awkward. We were canoeing in the middle of a lake, though, so he was but these are very important conversations to have, and it's not a one-time conversation. Let me tell you about an experience I had a couple years ago. My husband went back to school and got his MBA. We were in Texas, and so I thought, oh, it's time to just ask again. And he is so anti-porn. He's probably even more than me. I've heard him just like go on rampages again about this stuff. But we still need to talk about it and check in. So I asked him, so hey, honey, when's the last time that you saw porn? And he said, actually it was today. And I was very worried. And as he explained it to me, what happened was in one of his classes, a professor had played a video, and there's a sex scene in the film. And so I asked my husband, well, what did you do? And he explained to me that he walked out of the classroom, and that he sent his professor an email. And actually, right while we were talking, his professor had written him back. And this, sounds kind of funny, but it was an incredible moment in our marriage to just build our trust with one another and be able to talk about this kind of stuff. I felt so loved, and I felt I loved him even more, just to be able to have these conversations. So I encourage you to do, to speak up and to talk about it. While I'm on this little tangent, because you can ask more questions about this maybe in Q&A, but when you're dating, what if your partner does have a problem with pornography? What then? My advice is, today almost everybody has been exposed to pornography, almost everybody. So, I would argue that they're not automatically out of the running if they've seen porn or maybe, used it sometimes. But you want to ask them about their usage. You want to ask them if they're getting help, if they have a dependency. You want to ask them when the last time was. You want to ask them how they reacted when they saw it. Those things are all very important. And I would argue that you want to make sure that they've put in a lot of work if they do have a dependency to pornography, that they've put in a lot of work to overcome it before you allow the relationship to progress much farther, especially to something like an engagement or marriage. But I would plead with you, though, that you don't automatically discount someone who has been exposed to porn, because that's almost all of us these days. So stand for what is right. One time I was on an airplane. This was early in my years with this organization. Maybe some of you have seen my embarrassing YouTube video. But there was a man sitting in front of me watching pornography. It was hardcore pornography. I really think it was child pornography. It was pretty violent as well. I couldn't stay quiet, right? Of all people to sit in front of. So I started yelling at him on the airplane. And I got the flight attendant, and the flight attendant told me there was nothing he could do about it. And I was just stuck on the plane for 4 hours. It was so awful. And after after we landed, I made a YouTube video to share with our supporters just about the experience. And it went viral, and I got a ton of hate mail. I still get it because of this video. But every single airline except for American responded and changed their policy to no longer allow pornography and to better train their flight attendants on what to do. I mean, that was incredible. It was scary to say something, but look what happens sometimes. I know a young man in southern Utah who went to his grocery store and asked that they put Cosmopolitan magazine behind blinders. They did, in the whole chain in southern Utah, just because he asked. Sometimes that's all it takes, and sometimes it takes a bigger fight. But I encourage you to stand for what is right. We've developed a coalition called the Coalition to End Sexual Exploitation. The amazing thing about this coalition is it brings together the very social conservatives and the very radical feminists together in one. It's crazy. I feel like I'm going insane when I'm in meetings with all of us. There are about 287 organizations who are part of this. But the thing is this issue is not a partisan issue. We have to make sure that we're bringing together everyone we can to grow the movement against exploitation and to stand together. So I encourage you also to find people maybe on your campuses or others who you don't really agree with on anything else. Work together on these issues. So we have the Dirty Dozen list. This is how we got Hilton to change. I don't know if you've all heard of it. We pick 12 targets each year, and we kind of publicly shame them into changing their policies. We got Google to get pornography and sexually explicit apps out of Google Play as well, and they also changed their advertising policy to no longer allow pornographic ads or even ads that go to porn sites, and it's way better policy than I even asked for, which is really good. We got the Air Force and the Army to stop selling pornography. We got Facebook to kind of tighten their some of their what they do when people are caught spying and selling women and children and exchanging child sexual abuse images. So there's a lot you can do. And we have an action center, over 75 actions you can take. If you don't want to stand up and yell at someone on an airplane because it's awkward, you can just do this from home. There are lots of petitions. You can send tweets. The best Twitter campaign we did was against Barnes & Noble because they really care how they look in public. Maybe another idea right now I've been thinking a lot about doing something with McDonald's. They have unfiltered Wi-Fi, and they're marketing to kids, right? They have all the play place, and I have 2 kids, so why don't we publicly shame them on Twitter? They would probably respond, right? So, because they care about their image. So I encourage you to join, stand up for something, and you don't have to be so loud like I am, but you can do so from your phone or from home, quietly. Yeah, I'll close now. We have quite a few projects that I encourage you to use as helpful tools to you. We have pornharmsresearch.com, where we've tried to gather as many peer-reviewed research articles on the subject of pornography and how it affects the brain, how it's linked to trafficking, how it impacts children, etc. Encourage you to use that as a tool. Fight the New Drug is an incredible resource if you don't know who they are. I encourage you to look them up, fightthenewdrug.org.